My name is Michelle, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's webinar. And joining me today is Thandile Chinyavanhu and Yola Mgogwana. And before I give them a floor, I just want to do a little bit of introductions. But so as I mentioned before, on the scientific side, we have Thandile, and she is from Greenpeace Africa. She completed her Bachelor of Environmental Health, and she is a climate and energy campaigner at the said organization. So it's really, really exciting to have you with us, Thandile. And our second panelist is Yola Mgogwana. She is a young person who is very, very passionate about the climate space. She's very, very passionate about advocating, and we are going to hear more from them when I give them the opportunity to speak. So without going on, I am going to ask Thandile to please introduce yourself.
Okay. Well, as Michelle mentioned when she was introducing me, my name is Thandile Chinyavanhu, and I'm a climate and energy campaigner for Greenpeace Africa. I studied environmental health, and a big part of that is climate change and awareness, and that's really what drove me down the path of pursuing a career in climate.
I will give the floor to Yola. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi everyone. My name is Yola Mgogwana. I'm 13 years old. I'm from Cape Town, and I'm so happy to be with you here, guys.
Amazing. Thank you, Yola. We're very happy to have you here as well. So how today's session is supposed to be structured is that we have a presentation on the scientific side, and then we'll have more of a conversation with Yola at the end. But remember what I said, throughout this whole webinar, we are going to have the Q&A space open. So feel free to pop in your questions for each of our panelists. It'd be really, really great to hear from you. Okay, Thandile, are you ready?
I don't know if I should maybe provide a bit of context or head straight into the presentation.
Context is good.
Okay. The discussion that we'll be having today, or at least what I'll be discussing today, is intersectionality and its role in climate change. So for those who are not familiar with the concept of intersectionality, it's a term that was coined by a professor in civil society and race, Kimberly Crenshaw, and basically it speaks to how people who are affected by, or people who fall into the social categories of race, class, and gender tend to experience difficulties or social issues in a way that is more complex or compounded by their different categorizations in the system. So the concept has really found some fertile ground in activist groups, and this has really guided the social discourse when it comes to social justice, and particularly climate justice. So while it's quite an old term, it was coined about 30 years ago, it's really finding fertile ground and really penetrating into activist circles in this past decade or so. So what we'd like to discuss is how the climate crisis, which is, if you're familiar, a lot of in the environmental circles, it's something that's spoken about quite heavily, but to a lot of people outside of these groups, it is something that is to a lot of people categorized by the presence of those who speak the most about it. And that is with regards to the social standing of these people. And a lot of people view it as an issue that white people are particularly concerned about, and a lot of people who are within the environmental circles. But as you heard in Yola's discussion, it's something very much the contrary. People in her community are concerned about it. And I'll just be referring to an author of a a field to guide to climate anxiety, who spoke of how. Actually, I should actually be presenting. Maybe that would be better. I don't know if everyone can see the presentation.
We can see it. Thank you.
So, okay, if the font is not too small for you to see, but basically, this quote by Sarah Jacqueray, who is the author of A Field Guide to Climate Anxiety, speaks of how this phenomenon of climate change has largely been viewed as a white issue. And in her circles where she interacts with people, particularly those in environmental circles, it tends to be white men. And they are expressing this feeling of climate anxiety and what will happen in the event of the climate crisis, which is looming. And in many places, people are already experiencing the consequences of climate, as Yola mentioned, that her community does experience those. And so the challenge with this is that it's actually the people that are most affected by the climate change and its impacts, pandemics, pollution, natural disasters, are actually people that are Black, people that are indigenous in their countries, and people of color. And she poses a very important question in the article that I'm referencing, where she says, how can we make sure that climate anxiety is harnessed for climate justice? And I think we'll all recall just what has happened in the COVID-19 pandemic, because that has really been a precursor to what we're going to see when it comes to the climate crisis. The urgency and the anxiety that a lot of people have felt around the COVID-19 pandemic will really be felt again once the impacts of climate become more visible and tangible for people. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw those with the economic means rushing to the shops to go buy toilet paper and stockpile cans of baked beans and everything. And that was really just the beginning stages. But since then, as the pandemic has progressed, we've seen even more damaging displays of this kind of climate anxiety, and not necessarily displays of anxiety specifically. And how we're starting to witness that with the vaccines, and how a lot of the first world or developed world are hoarding these vaccines and creating a vaccine apartheid, where a lot of people in developing countries do not have the same ease of access to the vaccines that people that are living in first world countries do. And so that same sense of anxiety that people feel around COVID-19 will ultimately translate into the climate change disaster once it starts to be tangible for everyone. We'll see people hoarding resources for themselves, wanting to secure their future. And a lot of the people that don't have these means because they fall into a particular class will start to experience this in a more visceral way than other people. So we just want to discuss some of these social categories in which people fall that may make them particularly more exposed to climate. And just there's so many to go into today that maybe we can just focus on a few, and that being class, gender, and disability. So the issue of gender is quite a complex one, but what experts are seeing is that women are disproportionately threatened by climate change as opposed to any other social grouping. What they find is that women are already facing social disparities because of gender norms and being confined to working at home, or being confined to being caregivers or providers. And what we find in some of these communities, especially indigenous communities, is that the women are the providers, and they provide sustenance to their families through subsistence farming. And these are one of the first line of to be affected by the climate disaster. As these climate shocks start, drought, floods, and ultimately famine, these women will find it harder and harder to actually support their families. And so the climate crisis is both directly affecting them and indirectly. As you witnessed at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, we we saw reports of increased incidents of gender-based violence due to the home confinement. And it's actually reported that by experts that during times of financial difficulty or any sort of social difficulty, that incidents of gender-based violence tend to increase. So as people become frustrated by the impact of the climate change poses to their life, they're likely to their way of life, they're likely to take out these frustrations on women, and we're likely to see an increase in issues of gender-based violence. So this is why it's important that when we approach our campaigning around gender-based violence, that we start to see more incidents of violence from these communities. I'm just wanting to speak to the issue of class, as I mentioned before, that because people face numerous issues, and even here we see some intersections where because of discriminatory policies or practices, people that fall within the LGBTQIA plus grouping, as well as women and people of color, tend to be disproportionately fall into this category of lower class or lower to middle class individuals because of the lack of employment opportunities that they are offered. So there is an analogy that maybe you've heard about it that speaks to how if you place crabs in a bucket and one of them tries to escape from the bucket, then the other ones will try to pull the other crabs down. And this is labeled as a crab mentality. And it's used as a way to villainize those that are marginalized and poor, because they tend to label them as not being willing to support each other. But it's quite interesting, the use of that analogy, because someone has said a bucket is not the natural state or the natural environment of a crab. And so we cannot judge people based on the way that they channel their trauma or they experience trauma. And that's the reality of what the climate crisis will create. It's going to create that anxiety where people are forced into a state of self-preservation and wanting to make sure that they have some sense of security. And that's why it's so important right now that we channel our efforts into mitigating that while we still have the capacity to do so, to make sure that everyone is catered for, everyone is given the resources that they need. Because at the end of the day, the climate crisis is a class crisis, and it will create an environment where the lack of resources is really what exposes people to the difficulties or the challenges that the climate crisis poses. So just moving on to disability and climate. This is where we're starting to look more into how we can campaign around this and ensure that people who have disabilities are catered to in our campaigning, and also in the event of a disaster that they have someone to look out for them. So as Michelle mentioned before, I studied environmental health, and basically environmental health practitioners play a very important role in the climate change crisis, and being people who really provide access for people. So basically environmental health practitioners will go into communities in the event of a flood. They're the people to make sure that people have temporary housing, that people have access to clean water, because we know that contaminated water will pose a threat to people and expose them to diseases such as cholera. And with the increase in extreme weather events that comes about as a result of climate change, we're likely to see more of these diseases. So they're very pivotal characters or a profession in terms of handling the climate crisis. But unfortunately, that's only in theory. In practice, we're not really seeing these people advocating for adaptation and mitigation when it comes to climate change. And they're the people they're the first line of contact between the community and the government to really ensure that public health is prioritized. And one of the things that we see when it comes to disability and climate is that people with disabilities experience climate change in a way that is more intense, and it exposes them more to the elements and the impacts of climate change than any other group. So to the left, I just have a quote by a disabled people's and sexual reproductive health rights activist who speaks to how disability is a political issue. It's about access to healthcare, it's about access to education, and it's about access to social services. So what you find in instances of disasters is that a lot of people with disabilities don't necessarily have the access that they require to be able to access the services that they need. There's still these barriers that exist that that keep them from accessing these services. And so basically what the climate change will do is create more barriers to them accessing these services and just exacerbate the current issues that they're experiencing. And the image to the left is one where in 2005, I believe, when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, there was thousands of people that were displaced by that disaster. And particularly, there was a lack of planning for disabled people and how they would be catered to in the event of such a disaster. So what they found was that in this particular incident, which remains a jarring image in many people's minds, is that a 91-year-old woman who was using a wheelchair was turned away from a hurricane shelter as a result of the shelter being overwhelmed and overpopulated already for people that were seeking shelter. And unfortunately, she ended up dying outside, slumped over in that wheelchair. And I think this is sort of a scary experience for a lot of people that fall within these groups, that in the event of a disaster, are they considered in the plans? Will somebody come get them? Will someone know where to get them? Will they have safety and shelter? And will they be able to access the healthcare and all the resources that they need, which currently are a challenge for them? So in all that we do, and as much as we are fueled by this climate anxiety, we need to recollect that there's so many groupings that are affected by climate change in such a more intense way than maybe the most vocal people in the group may be. And as Yola mentioned, it's just a matter of why wouldn't they care if you were able to connect the dots for them and just make people realize that this is what the climate crisis, the threat it poses to you, and really working our way around how can we channel what we feel, this anxiety that we have, this fear that we have for what the next decade will hold and the decade after that for us, our safety, our security, our access to the comforts that we currently have. And what's important is to channel all those anxieties into making sure that everybody has access to the services that they need, that nobody's left out in the cold and nobody's left destitute to die, because we do have the resources to make sure that everyone is catered for. It's just a matter of prioritizing and making sure that these people are included. So of course, this is something that is still being fleshed out by a lot of activists and trying to understand the groupings. And I think it's very important that we continue to learn about it and to speak to it, to understand why it is that certain groups of people are more affected by this than others, or experience it in a different or more intense way. And so we look forward to exploring that more. I look forward to hearing from all of you what you think are the best ways that you could really channel what you feel, that climate anxiety, into climate justice. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Thandile. That was amazing. And I think we can all agree that intersectionality in this space understanding intersectionality in this space is very, very important because it already exists. Climate change is not an isolated issue. We can't tackle climate change without tackling unemployment, without tackling the nature of under-resourced communities. We just can't. It's impossible, right? And it's just incredible. So when you mentioned Hurricane Katrina, in my mind, I was also just thinking about what recently happened a little bit closer to home in Mozambique. This was not a long time ago when Cyclone Idai hit and thousands were displaced. And it just goes to show you that in the event of a disaster hitting that is related to the climate, not only will thousands be displaced, but a lot of people will be robbed of their livelihoods. They will lose everything that connects to their sense of identity. And it's, again, it just relates to how important it is to actually have these conversations, but more importantly, understanding the links and the intersectionality between all of these things. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think it also gets us thinking. It sobers our minds, and I'm going, hang on, but what have I done? Maybe since the beginning of this year. And I know that not everyone has the same privilege to go, hang on, but what have I done? Because we have been in a lockdown and we are currently in the middle of a pandemic. So maybe after this is all over, what are we going to do to address it, right? Thank you again. And I think now I would like to open up the Q&A again. If anyone has any questions to ask Thandile, please feel free, pop it into the Q&A box and we will give them to her. And while we wait on people to, if they do have questions for us, I want to know how best it is, because I mean, I've been in the climate space for a while now, and I sometimes understand the intersectionality, and honestly, sometimes I don't. And my question is, how best do you think a person who has not been exposed to this term, right, or someone who knows that it maybe sometimes exists, how best can we as people and as activists approach the intersectionality that comes with climate change and climate activism?
Oh, okay, thank you for that question. I think it's a very good one. And I agree with you, even for people that have been in the climate space for some time, and even people who have studied sociology, it still remains such a complex issue. And as much as you may think you understand it, there's always other elements that you may not be aware of or open to. And in every day that you interact with this, you will discover something new that you may not have considered before. But I think the best way that we can really interact with people that aren't familiar with the concept is to speak to them in a language that they understand. So, like I mentioned, connecting the dots for people. People know the experiences that they have. They know exactly how it troubles them, but they don't necessarily know that the cause of it, that the thing that we can really point towards is climate change. And so it's just a matter of making sure that in our campaigning that we're speaking to them, that we're making sure that their voices are heard in the work that we do. For example, if I could give the example of disability. When it comes to our campaigning, we put out our content with the idea that, you know, subtitles and everything to make sure that people are able to access it. We want to know that it can have the widest reach possible. But, and this is something that I'm only recently becoming aware of, is that certain people use certain software on their phone to be able to create an audio for them. In the case where someone might be blind, they might need an audio. And so when you put up a social media post, you might have hashtag climate change, hashtag climate justice is social justice is climate justice. And if you don't specifically use the correct characters or put it in a way that is readable to the software, that person won't be able to engage with this content at all. It'll just sound like gibberish when their app is able to read it. So it's important that in all the campaigning that we do, we make sure that first and foremost, that it's accessible to people and that it is democratized, that they can be able to understand it and it's expressed in a way that's understandable to their experiences and really puts forward what their experiences are, to really understand them. So it's up to us to understand what everyone is experiencing and really translate that into our content.
Thank you. Wow. Okay. Amazing. Thank you very much for that answer. I think it allows us to think a little bit differently, especially about accessibility. And I think accessibility also ties in with inclusivity, which I think is also or forms part of intersectionality and the conversation we are currently having. But of course, that would be maybe a conversation for another day. We have another question, and this is asking you to maybe explain why the fight for climate justice is a fight for justice itself.
Yeah, well, as we were mentioning in the presentation, a fight for climate justice is a fight for social justice, because all of social justice and its components, if anybody's left behind, whether it's because of their gender, because of their sexuality, because of their race, then it's not social justice. And at the end of the day, this climate crisis is something that's so closely linked to social justice, because it exacerbates all the issues that we currently have in our society. Every problem related to race, every problem related to access to healthcare, social services, water, electricity. It just makes everything worse, because it really will create greater barriers to people really accessing these services. So, and it'll even create more barriers for people through creating diseases, as we've mentioned, the impacts of climate change. As temperatures warm, we're more likely to see more diseases that would not necessarily be present in our specific regions spreading. And that becomes a social justice issue, as you've witnessed with COVID-19. There's so many characteristics that come with these challenges. I mean, when we look at COVID-19 and the impact that it's had, not just on every industry, across the industry, it's affected employment, it's affected mental health, as people have been largely grieving, struggling with loss of employment, and that really starts to erode at our social structure as a society, and that's how it really creates social challenges. So it's very important that we start to recognize these areas, these gaps, and try to correct those. And I think, as you mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic has really made people realize the gaps and the cracks that we have in society. So those already exist, and we now know that climate change is going to make these worse, and how can we really go about rectifying this?
Thank you so much for that answer, Thandile. I think that perfectly answers it. I think we have about six minutes before we have to wrap up. So I am going to decide that this might be the last question for you just for today, so that we don't hold people back. So the question goes, but before that, it says, thank you for your great presentation. Glad we could hear from you today. This is from Gabriel. So when you mentioned us having money to bridge the gaps that prevent disabled people from being included, how do you think we should petition government for this inclusion?
I think that's a very good question, and it's a challenging one that we're, trying to approach. The sad reality is that, as you know, when we speak about South Africa and the society, people tend to say it's like a tale of two economies, that it's a developed world and it's a non-developed world at the same time. And we're kind of in that limbo. But the resources are there. They're definitely there. It's just a matter of where they're channeled. And this speaks to what you mentioned about Hurricane Ida and Cyclone Ida, and the most recent one, Cyclone Eloise, is that we have the resources to cater to these things. They're just being channeled towards industrialization, and specifically carbon majors such as Sasol and Eskom. These industries are receiving fuel subsidies from our government. They're receiving tax breaks that are astronomical. So you know that the funds are there, they're just being channeled towards fossil fuel industry. And
Right.
South Africa, as one of the most industrialized countries on the continent, enjoys the fruits of that industrialization, while our counterparts in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, and even people in the northern parts of South Africa, Limpopo and Mpumalanga, experience the brunt of those of industrialization through the disasters. And so it's a matter of just the government is aware of it, but we just need to continue to campaign against these organizations that are really the recipients of all these funds, and make sure that the government recognizes the hardships that people are experiencing, and that they make the relevant adjustments and make sure that they stop subsidizing fossil fuels, put more into creating sustainable cities, put more money into sustaining, making sure that people have access to the mitigation and adaptation measures, and that they are included in the disaster management plan. So the funds are there. It's just a matter of where they're being allocated. They're opening up funds for green investment at an amazing rate, but we still to make sure that the social justice elements are really catered to. And so I would just advise that you continue being vocal as you all have been about social justice, and making sure that the government is aware that your voice is heard with regards to this.
Thanks, Thandile. The spirit in me to not leave anyone behind forces me to read this very last question, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds to please address it. And it says, how can we push our narrative as the global south and amplify these intersectionalities?
That's a good question. I think trying to think, how can I answer this in 30 seconds? I think what's important is I'm inspired by this Gen X generation, and I think they've done amazing already in doing that and being so vocal about it. So continue to do that, and the climate strikers, everyone that has been so vocal, it's an inspiration, and continue to do that. I think that's the best way to do it, and people are definitely opening up their eyes to it. So you're on a good start, good path.
Thank you so much, Thandile, and thank you so much for your time. Thank you for that really, really amazing presentation. And yeah, thank you for just everything that you have given to us. Every bit of information that you shared with us it's going to go a long way. I know it, and I feel it in my heart. Yola, I'm just gonna get into it with you. I want to understand how this started. What this means for you, what activism in the climate space means for you. So what really is it that got you to become an activist?
What got me into activism is that I first joined Eco Warriors as a child in my school as an extramural activity, not knowing that it could like teach me many things in my life, and that I could be an activist. And I remember one day when our topic was about climate change, I was flabbergasted about this word. It was so big and gigantic. But when we learned about climate change, I was shocked in a way that the hardships that we face, like where I live, that every day is like caused by climate change. And like for example, floods and droughts. And I thought to myself, like, what should I do? And how can I do so? And that's when I went to Miss Polly and approached her and say that, like, I need to fight against this thing because it's affecting me and the people that I live with, and I have to do something. Yeah.
Amazing. So wow, that's incredible. So before I ask a lot about what you've been doing in the climate space, why you're doing it, and all of those really interesting questions, I want to know some of the things that you learned from the Earthchild program.
I'm sorry, I think it's my connection. Can you please repeat the question?
It's fine. I think you can leave your video off just so the connection is a little bit more stable. But my question was, what are some of the lessons that you learned from Earthchild and Eco Warriors?
In Eco Warriors, we were learning about how we could take care of our environment and how we can also keep it clean. And like we would like do posters about saving marine life and about how to stop pollution and to close our taps. And yeah, and then as we continue to be part of the Eco Warriors, Miss Polly formed a group called Eco Girls, and where we would like advocate up against climate injustice and fight for climate justice. Yeah.
Incredible. So what are some of the ways that you've been fighting against climate change in your Eco Girls group?
Like from looking around, like where we live as a young black girl growing up in a like informal settlement and in most vulnerable communities, like we face like challenges of like having droughts and facing floods. So like in climate goals, like we would like Miss Polly would like train us on how to like to stand up and to fight and to advocate against that, and to also like spread awareness and make people aware that climate change like really exists, and we have to like and we have to act before time. Yeah.
Incredible. So I know that a lot of the times, right, climate change, because it's not a rapid thing, so it doesn't come like the floods do. It's not a thing that people can go. So what I'm really trying to say is it's not something that a lot of people are willing to accept, or it's not a thing that a lot of people are willing to believe, simply because they either don't understand it or because they think it doesn't relate to them. So what are some of the things that you've had to battle with being a young person, right? Living where you live and interacting with the people you interact with. Just what are some of the experiences that you've had trying to start a conversation about climate change? Yeah.
Where I live in an informal settlement. So like when it's very hot, like we face like heat waves. We live like in a shack. So and then our shacks are like placed in next and next of others next to each others, and then like we don't have like enough space, and then like that affects us because like we have a lot of air to breathe in, and that since I'm a person that lives with asthma, like it makes for me difficult to breathe because I sometimes suffocate. And for floods like really like occur in my place, and when like it's raining, like I kind of feel like I'm worried because I don't know what I would expect, and also like when there's drought, like we have to like to think twice, like we have to think twice for my family, because we have to think of like buying water or buying food, because at the end of the day we have to eat. So we have to think like which one we have to first prioritize. And like facing climate change is very has a very negative impact in my life. And that is why like I feel like it's a good thing to educate people and to make people that climate change really exists, and many people out there are already living the effects, even though the science say that we have there's certain time that we can affect the climate change causes, the climate change effects. But as for us, like there are people that are living those effects, and that is why we have to like to make everyone aware, and that is why we have to call for an urgent call. Thank you.
Amazing. So this is definitely a very real experience for you. It's something that you have to live with day in or day out, regardless of what the weather looks like. Whether it's in winter, you're still dealing with the effects. Whether it is in summer, we've got extreme droughts. It's horrible. I thank you so much for being so willing to speak to us about it, and just making sure that other people see from a different perspective, simply because you have a lived experience. And I think this definitely makes people take climate change a little bit more seriously. So thank you for that. Well, I'm interested to know if you're comfortable with sharing, and I think it'd be really, really inspiring for other people to hear as well. How old are you?
I'm 13 years old. I'm 13 years old. Yes.
What grade are you in?
I'm in grade 8. I'm in the 8th grade. Yes, I'm in grade 8.
So you are a 13-year-old climate activist. I'm really just in awe of, you the way you present yourself, it's really, really incredible. And the understanding that you have of this crisis, I think also because you experience its effects day in and day out, it's really, really admirable. But, you know, I have to ask, how is your community dealing with the effects of climate change?
Thank you for that question. I feel like it's a very good question that we have to look into. Like my community right now at the state, like they are very clueless, they are unknowledge because I feel like they don't know what is happening in their daily lives. And I think like I feel like they think that it's natural disasters, and when like it's no longer natural disasters, it's something that we have created at the same time that we have to fight against for. And that is why I say that we have to like to spread awareness and also to knowledge people. And that is why I decided to start my eco group in my community, and I'm teaching younger kids about how to grow their own food and also how to take care of their environment in a way of spreading awareness.
Oh, that is amazing. I want to know more about what you're doing in your community. And I really, really hope that we're going to get to that in the next part of our webinar. So thank you so much for sharing with me. I'm going to get back to you, but for now, I would like to give the floor to Thandile. And while we do that, Yola, I'm going to come back to you, and you know, you can maybe explain to us more about what you're doing with the girls and the club that you formed, like just a little bit more detail. What kind of food do you grow? What type of material do you teach to the girls, etc., etc.?
So I have to tell you about what I do in my group.
Yes, please.
Well, in my group, I teach 15 kids. They are younger than me, and I teach them to grow their own food. And I gave them the seedlings, and then I was messing them on how to grow their container gardenings. And yeah, they are really doing good. And like we also like go around, maybe on Fridays we go around and collect litter, and where we can create eco bricks. I don't know if you have heard of eco bricks, and then we create eco bricks. Yeah, but we are thinking of something amazing of doing like a furniture of that. Like doing furnitures out of those eco bricks. Yeah.
I think for the rest of this webinar, I'm simply going to be saying wow, because wow, that is incredible. So what are some of the things that you've actually grown? What are some of the things that you've taught the 15 girls to grow? And how is the challenge of land affecting what you're trying to do with them? Because I know land might not always be available for what you're trying to do. So how then are you overcoming that obstacle?
Can you please repeat the question? Like,
Okay, so I'd be interested to know some of the plants you've grown, so some of the food that you've grown with the girls, and also how you are addressing or dealing with the fact that land to do your gardens is not always available.
so what I do, yes, land is a problem, but like I studied like I wanted them to firstly do a container gardening. Then like we haven't like gotten to a state where like we can make big gardens, but it was small gardens like a container gardening. And yeah, and like yeah, land is a problem. Yeah.
I really hope in the near future you're going to have the land that you need. You know, that you're going to have land to actually do what you're doing, and that it's going to aid your fight against climate change. I really just have to thank you for, talking to us about this. It's just, incredible. And from you speaking, I'm picking up a lot of things, but also from the webinar as a whole. I mean, we live in South Africa, and we know that not everyone has access to mobile devices, but then a lesser number of people have access to the internet, and a lesser number of those people have access to devices that allow them to stream like we're doing. And depending on the area, connectivity then becomes an issue. And I think this just should make us all take a moment to think about the connectivity divide and how it affects certain things. Like, I know this could be slightly off topic, but how it affects, learning. Since the pandemic, we've had to move to online learning. We've had to move to online webinars. We've had to move a lot of things to online. And the reality is there's a real gap in our country that doesn't allow everyone to be able to actually connect like we're doing here. So that is amazing. And I think through you speaking, Yola, I've also picked up on the fact that your connectivity is not that great as well. And I would also like to apologize to everyone for some of the glitches that we are experiencing. And also apologies to everyone. We cannot continue with Thandile. The technical difficulties just cannot be overcome. So we're just going to continue chatting with Yola and just trying to get a little bit more of a picture of the realities of climate change in South Africa, but not just in South Africa, in under-resourced communities such as, the one that we've been talking about now. So yeah, we'll try and get Thandile on a different webinar, and hopefully the connectivity will be better then. So before we move on, I'd like to open up the Q&A box for anyone who has a question, anyone who has any sort of contribution they would like to make. The floor is yours. Please do use the Q&A box. It's written question and answer, and it's right next, like below. You should be able to access it. It says Q&A. So please do pop in your questions in there. Any questions that you have for Yola that you would like her to answer. And please do raise your hand if you would like to speak, and we'll give you the mic. So I'm going to give a minute or two to anyone who would like to type their questions, and then I have the honor of reading them out so that Yola can actually address them. But remember to use the Q&A box. So while we wait for some of the questions, Yola, I have picked up that you have experienced a great deal of you've experienced a lot, right? You have been fighting since before you even knew you were fighting against climate change. So I would like to know how your experiences in this space have shaped some of your future goals.
I'm sorry, I feel like it's connectivity, but can you please repeat the question one more, please? Sorry.
Yes, I was saying, from us having this conversation, I've picked up that you have gone through a lot, especially in this space. So how has this experience shaped your goals for the future?
Like climate change, and climate change effects have infected me badly. And I remember one day when it was this day, and it was raining heavily, and then my house got flooded, and my school uniform and my school books, and also my school shoes were flooded. They were wet, so I couldn't go to school the following day. And then my teachers from my school didn't understand, especially the maths teacher. They didn't understand that I got flooded. My house got flooded, and yeah, I had not to go to school because of floods, and I feel like they stopped me from getting my education that I need. Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow. Wow. Okay, so I'm gonna try and see if I would have digested your response by the time we address this question. So we've got a question in the Q&A box, and it says, it's from Bridget. It says, do people in your area understand the connection between burning fossil fuels like coal and climate change?
Do they what?
Do they understand the relationship or the connection between burning fossil fuels like coal and climate change?
No, no. I think they don't know any of those things, that burning fossil fuels has an effect on our environment. No, I don't think they are unknowledge. They don't have that knowledge. And then that is what I'm trying to work on, to educate people in my community, because I believe the best power is education. And yeah, and yeah, yeah.
You feel free to explain more to us. We really want to hear some of your experiences. So because they don't understand, the connection between fossil fuels and climate change, how do you think it would be best? So I know that education, it's like a really big thing to just say education should be used to do this. But what do you think should be done, not just by you, because you are just one person and you're doing incredible work as it is, but what do you think our leaders should do in this regard?
Thank you for that question. I feel like our leaders are since they are the powerful ones, that I feel like they should also engage with us, since they are the decision makers. They should engage with us, especially the youth. You see, because we are the ones who's going to be badly affected, because the sciences says have proven that we have 9 to 8 years left, maybe, I think. And then they will be dead by then, and then we are the ones who's going to face the consequences of climate change. And us, we have already experienced that. But to keep it less, they have to act and implement the deep just transition plan, that we should use renewable energies, like the solar panels, because they are eco-friendly. And then we will be no longer using we will no longer using coal and burning fossil fuels. Yeah, I think.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I definitely agree with you on that one. We definitely need leaders who act. Yeah, and do you think that people in your community would care about climate change if they knew? So I know we've heard so many people who say people wouldn't care even if they knew. And there's a lot that goes on behind that. But do you actually think that people would care about climate change if they knew that this is how it affects them, if they knew that, things such as fossil fuels affect them in the way that it does?
I think they would care because they get affected, and then why wouldn't they care? I think they would care because like what they are experiencing, like is no one wish to experience that. So they would definitely care.
That is definitely valid. I mean, how would someone not care if they knew that it could potentially kill them? Mitchelle, thank you for that. We have another question, and this time it's from Julia. Julia says, what are the actions the people in your community take to cope or deal with the impacts of climate change, such as floods?
Like, can you please repeat that question, please?
Of course. So Julia wants to know what the people in your community do to deal with the impacts of climate change. So in the event of a flood, how does your community react to flooding? How does your community address the flooding issue, and how do they make sure that it doesn't impact them as badly as it has potential to?
Nothing, to be honest, nothing, because I feel like we don't have that power, that much power to stop that, or to get help from other people. That is why, like, I I spread awareness, like seeking for help at the same time, telling people my story, and for them to get inspired, and for them to also act to save more lives, to get from affected. Yeah.
Great. So when you say that you guys don't have power, I can just imagine that, you know, our leaders have a little bit more power to ensure that there's safer housing, and also to ensure that the country collectively addresses climate change so that communities such as yours don't have to deal with such things. Am I right in assuming that?
Yes. Yes, you're all right.
Awesome. So we've got a question from an anonymous attendee, and their question is, what inspires you as a climate activist?
What inspires me to be a climate change activist is me. I feel inspired by me, by what I'm doing, because I feel like we really need to act, and we really need to spread awareness. And as a young girl growing up from Kailicham, living all these effects of climate change without knowing, I really feel like it's time to stand up and fight and spread awareness, and to get more people to unite, and spread awareness, because yeah, we really need to spread awareness.
Oh, that's amazing. You know, it's not every day that someone says, I'm my own inspiration, but that's really, really interesting, because you have a right to do that, because you are a very inspirational person. So thank you for inspiring us to act, for inspiring us to listen to your lived experiences. It's really incredible. The next question that we have is from Pumela, and Pumela says, looking back at before you were an activist, what change do you see?
Sorry.
So looking back at before you were an activist, what change do you see? So before you were an activist, how were things? And now that you are an actual activist, what are some of the things that you've seen change? Or, yeah.
Like locally, or or like from saying from my works, or what?
So I would be interested to know from your work. I would also like to hear from, like, in your community. I would like to hear from a South African perspective, because you've been an activist for quite some time now. And I would also like to know on a global scale. So you can start talking about some of the changes that you've seen in your community and some of the things that you've done to make sure that that change was possible.
Okay. Okay, I think I will talk about this climate goals group, but now it's no longer climate goals. And then like there were 4 of us, and then we were only girls. And then but first it was only me and Otimbele, but we increased by 4, and then there were 4 girls. But now I think there's 9 of us, and then there's me, and then it's no longer climate girls, it's climate kids. And like I really feel that I have inspired more, like I have inspired youth, like young kids in my school and in my community by also wanting them to talk, because it's a great increase by, like we have increased by how many kids, like 3 or 5 kids. And then like I very feel inspired, and I feel that I inspire other kids by also wanting to make change. Yeah.
It's amazing.
And and also by the group that I have started. And then like most of those kids that I teach, like they don't go to school that I used to go to, and they go to the next school. And then like they are very, very, very excited to be in my group, because like what I teach them is not what they get taught in their classrooms, and they don't have all those knowledge, but what I'm teaching them like is amazing, and they really enjoy it. Thank you.
You're amazing. So I would also think that what you're teaching the people is also amazing. So thank you for that. Thank you for being such an inspiration. Thank you for inspiring others. Thank you for inspiring yourself. And thank you for inspiring me. I almost always say this, but every time I'm inspired, I know it in my heart. When I grow up, I want to be like Yola. That's my goal. Like I want to be like you. Yeah, I just do. We have another question, and it says, what are your favorite memories or highlights as a young climate activist?
My highlights. Okay. My highlights from like the youngest climate activist I can say is to be the inspiration to other young kids, and is to see all the good work that I'm doing. And also like I feel like I'm inspiring young and old people. And yeah. And I'm very, very happy that I'm spreading awareness.
That I'm happy that you are. I'm happy that you're inspiring other people, and thank you again for that. Thank you so much for allowing us to be in your mind for a little bit. And I'm just going to ask this one question from the Q&A, and then we are going to move on to Thandile. So this question is for you, Yola. As a climate activist, what change do you want to see in our system? Maybe our country, maybe our schools, maybe just daily life. As a climate activist, what change would you like to see?
Like first I want to see a deep just transition in our like energy supply. We have to use renewable energies like for real. And like in our schools, like I really feel like it's a very good thing that that children should get like educated about what is going on around their environment, and then like what is happening. Because like it's a pity that like there are other like kids like who live in vulnerable and informal settlements like I do, that like get affected by climate change every day without knowing like that is climate change. So I feel like they have to teach them, and they have to be taught in their classroom, and not to be only taught about economy and all the stuff, but also about our environment. Yeah, environment. And stop inventing like things that will abuse our environment. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much, Yola, for that. So, a last question maybe, so that we can quickly wrap up and not keep people beyond the time they would have budgeted. So this question is for you, Yola. It's from Sarah. What do organizations trying to solve climate change need to do to reach people better in your community?
Like organization that wants to make change.
Yes. So organizations that are trying to solve climate change, what do they need to do to reach people in your community better? So how do we make sure that these organizations can relate to people from your community?
I think it's ECP, and I feel like what they are teaching me like is something that needs to spread to others, and that they have to learn, you know. Yeah. And not to be only based on certain primary schools, but my wish for them is to also like to be in communities, and for the world kids like to have the chances to learn and have knowledge about our environment.
Thank you so much, Yola, and thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. Thank you, Thandile, for your time and your expertise. Yola, thank you so much for your expertise and your lived experiences. And thank you so much to everyone who joined us for this session. It's amazing. Thank you. We can't express how grateful we are that you decided to join us. And as we all log off and go home, I guess we are already home. But as we get back to our normal lives, quote unquote, I would like to implore each and every one of us to think about intersectionality in the climate change space, right? And I would also like us to understand that climate change in itself is not an isolated issue. Something, again, that Thandile mentioned in her presentation was about how the climate change space is often viewed in a white lens, right? So how best can we make sure that the climate change space is also diversified, right? So those are just some of the questions to take home. And thank you again to everyone who joined us. Please enjoy the rest of your evening, and looking forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you.